Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Framework Podcast. My name is Tyler Burke, and this is
This is David Waselkow.
hello, David Waselkow.
Hello, sir. How are you this evening?
I am always good. Every time you ask me, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah,
Excellent,
doing good.
excellent. All right. Well, tonight, we've had a number of conversations recently, and one that really stuck out that we thought we'd dive into tonight is the idea around a very unique environment that the many therapists create. I think you especially are very, very good at creating an environment that is quite unique, that is full of some dynamics that most people um, honestly are so desperate for. They're willing to pay for it, which is quite a different dynamic, quite a different scenario than a lot of times what we think of traditional therapy to be of tell me what's going on and how do you feel about that and shit.
Right.
But you really create and have the ability to create an environment that is quite appealing, that is very much full of obviously safety, trust, and some things that we're going to talk about tonight that, very interestingly enough, in our conversations about this, is an environment that I think is something that everyone can actually incorporate into the relationships with their partners and and even other people. So I thought it'd be very fun to sort of go through some of those different dynamics and things that you do specifically that hopefully myself and others watching can hopefully live out and incorporate with our partners.
Yeah, it's such a cool idea. I love this idea.
Well, let's get it.
Let's get after it.
Yeah.
There's the first part about why this is so important is we want to encourage you to understand what we mean when we talk about a therapeutic relationship. What does that really mean, and what does that do for you in that context? And then to your point, can you take your experience in therapy, which is really supposed to be a model or a template for how relationship can function well in the wild? Can you take what you've experienced and take what you learn there and create it in your own relationships and use it as a litmus test for kind of evaluating the health and functioning of your relationship? So I love this topic.
This is something that when I first started thinking about therapy or going back to therapy, I should say, my original thought was, let me take my fucked upness to someone and they can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I get there, and what I found was very much though a lot of that fixing happened, a lot of the I learned a tremendous amount, but the environment of what we're talking about tonight, of what I found, was very different than anything I had ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to the credit of the work that we've done together, I hope to think anyway that I've been able to transition that into kids and other relationships in my life.
Yeah, and you have.
So yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, and remember, whether it's a therapeutic relationship, a consultative relationship, it's the same thing. You start with that idea of fit, rapport, and trust. But right away, what a person can believe about themselves is that they are fucked up. And what is immediately then identified and discussed is that just because you're in a fucked up situation doesn't mean you're fucked up. And what's likely fucked up is your thinking about it, not you.
You mean it's not the other person's fucked upness? That's the whole problem.
Right.
Are you saying that's not it?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, but immediately that's different because in the movies and TV and popular culture, the idea is that the patient or the client is fucked up and they're coming in to get fixed. And so right away, we start with the idea that the fix is not the person. The fix is the ideas, the thinking, the implementation, the execution, the rules, all of that. Right. Immediately that makes things different from what so many people experience in therapy when therapy is done differently, when the patient or the client is seen as the problem instead of the patient or the client seen as in possession of problems.
Hmm. All right. I like it.
Okay, so first thing about creating that environment before we get to the principles that facilitate it is understanding that the single most highly correlated variable with sustainable and successful results in therapy has nothing to do with philosophy, with theoretical orientation, with intervention styles. Those things, they do matter. But the most important thing is fit, rapport, trust. Does the client think and or feel that their therapist, their consultant, whatever the configuration is a good fit for them? Matters more than anything else. So it's imperative to be honest about that right from the very beginning. And what happens within that honesty is that the client or the patient is immediately empowered as an expert who can make decisions about that very thing. So if it's me therapeutically, yes, I'm thinking about whether I'm a good fit for this person in terms of my areas of competence and expertise and how we're doing dialogue and all those different types of things. But the client is immediately empowered to make those decisions without threat of punishment or embarrassment. In fact, they're encouraged, at least by me, to scrutinize the hell out of me and reminded that it may take time for them to arrive at a sense of whether I'm a good fit and that is okay too. But the client's responsibility is really to scrutinize their therapist to ascertain whether the client thinks the therapist is a good fit for them.
Hmm.
And I'm explicit and direct about that right from the very beginning because I have, I think, an ethical, if not legal or clinical, obligation to make absolutely certain that whomever I work with is positioned for the highest probability of success. And since I know that rapport and fit contribute to that, I think it's crucial to be honest about that with anyone that I work with. And so when that honesty and that empowerment occurs right from the very beginning, I would say the stage is set for the rest of the environmental conditions to kick in that then permit a really strong, healthy, functional, therapeutic relationship. But make no
Hmm.
mistake, therapy is a relationship between client and therapist. It's a different kind of relationship than other relationships, to be sure. But it is a relationship, and it is certainly not one sided.
Hmm. Seems like it's a highly stereotypicalized
Hmm. Hmm.
relationship that typically has so many. There's so many projected ideas about it, and I've been through various therapists and consultants over the years, and I'll tell you, I made zero progress with every single person that I had zero connection with.
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
none.
Yep.
You kind of dread going. You start questioning the shit that they're telling you, like, oh, this the thing and the thing that you always do the thing, and there's just no respect, no,
Mm.
and it's just a total waste of time and money.
Mm. Yeah, it
So
is.
I love it.
And it just compounds the pain and the frustration, right? Because here you are doing all the things that you think you're supposed to do that are, you know, appropriate, even dare I say courageous, making yourself vulnerable, putting yourself out there. And then what happens? You get this typical archetypal shit and you
Hmm.
feel defeated and confused and even more reticent the next time to come in and try again.
I actually felt like I wasn't able to get vulnerable
Yeah,
without the
that
relationship.
right. Relationships everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, relationship is everything in it.
yeah.
it can be built and facilitated right from the very beginning. And I think that part of how that works is by having really the audacity to be honest. Because I will say to everyone, as a part of that statement that I just made, that I couldn't conceivably be a good fit for every single person that I meet. I know I'm not everyone's flavor of vodka, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
Now, some people are not okay with that in themselves. They want to be liked by everybody. They want to be
Mhm.
maybe respected by everybody. They want everyone to listen to them. And it's understandable. It's fine. But my style is not going to work for every single person, even though it's my belief that the framework applied to their style does work for every other person. But if my delivery is not something that fits in that rapport piece with a person, then the most intelligent thing to do, the most kind and benevolent thing to do, the most respectful thing to do is to say thanks, but no thanks, and then move on to someone who is a better fit.
Well, that's again, it's because it's about the relationship.
Right.
It's not about being right or having all the answers and just informing people of the right thing to do.
Yep.
So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and hopefully you know this, it is somewhat unique and very much appreciated.
Mm,
Um,
thank you.
just telling you.
I really appreciate that. I sincerely, because that may be the greatest compliment I think a person could get. So truly it means a lot to me. And thank you very much
Mm,
for that.
yeah. So what do you got for us?
Okay. So, you know, certainly part of environment is physical environment. We're not talking about creating a physical environment, but I think we need to acknowledge that the physical environment where therapy occurs is important. And it's important to recognize that most therapy occurs outside of that physical environment, meaning you learn about the stuff in therapy. You have the rapport, you have the fit, you're building the relationship. It's occurring in a physical environment that is conducive to that. But then you're applying everything you learn out there. That's where therapy really occurs. But and I would be remiss to not acknowledge that the actual physical space in which the therapy occurs is something that any therapist worth their salt works really, really hard to create. And it's about, the size of the room. It's about things like proxemics, which means sort of like the physical distance between the therapist and the client. What kind of setting do you have for the client to sit in? And is that comfortable? Do you have things around them to help them feel comfortable? What is the decor like? What are the colors like? How does the room smell? What does the therapist look like in terms of their appearance and all those other types of things? So all those things are part of environment.
Breath mints.
That too. Um, I have a little thing of outstanding mints on
Mm.
my side table between the two chairs where clients can sit, and they have this extraordinary tropical smelling hand sanitizer that sprays on and isn't too sticky and Purelli.
I was talking about your smells, not the clients.
Well, okay. Daddy does smell nice. I did. So let's just, acknowledge that that too, I think, is a part of it. But you can have all of that, and if you're an egotistical asshole, you got nothing, right?
Mhm.
Milton Erickson, one of my sort of heroes in the field, and sort of the point of origin of the theoretical and intellectual branch on which all the things that I do originates from. When he started practicing out of his house, actually in Phoenix, after a pretty illustrious career, he was interviewed by somebody, and he had just like a desk and a small chair. And the person was like, "Really? You can do therapy under these conditions?" And kids running around and all kinds of shit. And Milton says, "Well, I'm here."
Yep.
So, point is, yeah, physical environment matters, but
Mm.
none of that matters unless Milton is there unless,
Mhm.
the therapist has a certain orientation. That's what builds the environment. That's what we're
Mhm.
talking about. So there are 10 principles, and I use that word on purpose, principles, that I think make the relational environment possible, functional, and operative.
Okay.
And we've covered all of them in various podcasts. So we won't spend too much time talking about them. If you want to have more information on it, you can look at previous podcasts. But here's the first one. I know as a therapist that the first thing that I do always and forever is I separate person from behavior. I separate idea from person. So, right back to the point that you made in the opening of this podcast, you said, if I go into therapy and I think I'm fucked up and I need to be fixed, immediately my principle kicks in and says, no, I get it. You may feel that you're fucked up. You may think that you're fucked up, but you are not. Your ideas likely are. Some of your beliefs may be. Some of your thinking may be, but you are not fucked up.
Mm.
Now, it's a little risky to say to a person, I think some of your ideas are fucked up, but it is less risky by a lot when that person knows that you're not talking about them, you're talking about a thought pattern,
Mhm.
a perception pattern. Those are things we can change. We're not talking about changing a fucked up person. We're talking about changing fucked up thinking
Mhm.
or patterns of perception, communication, whatever.
It seems like that's one of the, we talk about translating that then from the therapeutic room to other relationships.
Right.
And my mind goes right to kids,
Yep.
obviously, romantic partner spouses and things of like, why the hell are you like this? What were the hell were you thinking? You know what I mean? And it's it's
Yes.
it's this very much a targeted thing at you. Like, God, what a flawed thing to do.
Right.
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 Um, so
Right. With, a lot of unintended consequences, because there you're trying to teach, but you end up admonishing and judging.
mhm,
And that's not a good recipe for a healthy environment for a good therapeutic relationship or any other kind of relationship.
mhm,
So, to your point with the example of kids, I always use that example when I introduce this principle. And I say, this is what allows us to say to our kids, right now, I find your behavior totally unacceptable, but I accept you as a person. And the same thing is true whether it's a romantic partner, a family member, a friend, a colleague, whatever. We separate person from behavior so that we can focus on the behavior and not get caught up in accidentally indicting someone's personhood.
mhm,
So, where the therapeutic relationship is a model for other relationships, this is a great principle to adopt in your marriage, in your romantic relationship, in your relationship with your kids, relationship with colleagues, friends, whomever. Separate the person from the behavior. Principle number one. Okay. Related to that, and all of these are related, think of this as a constellation of interconnected principles that reinforce one another. Have that picture in your mind, right? This is not a categorical list so much as it is a constellation of things with vectors, really, is a good way to visualize this for you visual folks out there. Principle number two, all behavior is goal directed. So we've already done a good job of separating person from behavior, looking at the behavior. Now, when we look at the behavior, instead of immediately judging that behavior, we're thinking, all right, if all behavior is goal directed, that means that everyone's trying to accomplish something with the behaviors that they select. And we need to remember communication is a form of behavior.
mm,
So, in other words, It's about understanding that there is a why. We got to find that why. Now, that why may not be particularly righteous. It may not be particularly rational. It may not be appropriate, but it's there.
What? And it's assuming that we know it. And it seems like there's so much judgment happens initially before you even know what the hell the why is,
Absolutely.
right?
Right. Well said.
And I think that's one of the best things that happens in a therapeutic room
Hmm.
is again bringing it back to the environment that's there, is someone just being in a non-confrontational way.
Hmm.
Why would you do that?
Right.
Why would you say that? Why would you think that?
Right. Right.
Do you know the power that would be if we could just take a step back
Right.
and ask why before we jump down someone's throat?
Absolutely.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And that question about the why, because of the rapport and the trust, means that the person who's being asked the question does not need to mount an affirmative defense for it. They need to search themselves to find it, because very often, although all behavior is goal directed, that doesn't necessarily mean a person has conscious awareness of that goal or of that why,
Hmm.
which is why I teach why what communication so much, right? So when we ask that question, if we're honoring the relationship and being honest, the recipient of that question may honestly respond by saying, I got no fucking idea. Now, that's a parent child relationship. The parent may deem that an excuse.
Hmm.
Or if it's a romantic relationship, the other partner may deem that as evasion or avoidance or what have you. But it may be, and often is, an honest response. But we don't stop there. If the honest response to the why question is, I don't know, that's accepted, because we're acknowledging that reality exists. There's a blind spot here.
Hmm.
So now we're going to take a minute and we're going to find the why, because it's there. Sometimes when we find it, we realize, okay, the why wasn't all that righteous. I was trying to score points. I was trying to throw shitballs. I was trying to be whatever. But it's there nonetheless. When we find it, when we acknowledge it, that explains the behavior we just observed. So if we're looking to do behavioral change or behavioral modification, we can't do that in the absence of a why. And we certainly can't do it by standing over here and saying, well, your behavior is unacceptable, period. It must change, because that's ignoring the idea that there's a why behind that behavior, that behavior was goal directed. And by the way, if you're a parent, it's a wonderful exercise in teaching, because what are you teaching in that moment? You're teaching the kid self-awareness instead of teaching the kid they're bad.
Hmm.
Now, the kid may have done some bad things, and there may have been some unintended consequences of having done those bad things. But there was a why behind it, and you can't understand the kid or you can't understand the person until you seek an understanding of the why.
Are you implying that understanding the behavior and the why is more important than anything else?
Well, yeah, because behavior on its own is deceptive, right? Behavior is like a buoy that floats on top of the water. We can see it, we can observe it. But tethered to that buoy beneath the surface of the water is an anchor that we cannot see. That anchor is our why. And that why is the thing that drives behavior. Okay, I'm right now borrowing from a philosophical tradition that comes out of something called relationship awareness theory, and in particular, an instrument called the SDI, the Strength Deployment Inventory. So I want to give credit where credit's due for this buoy anchor concept.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm doing differently with that is that in that model, the anchor there is something called our motivational value system, which is essentially our personality. Okay. It's a constellation of strengths. I'm simplifying and sort of reducing that to its essential properties without being overly reductionistic and calling that our why. Okay. So if the only thing that you do is observe behavior, you're likely to be deceived or to come to erroneous hypotheses or conclusions about what that is. You got to seek the motivation that's underneath that's driving it. And what I'm arguing and presenting here is the motivation that drives that behavior. And the way to understand what you're observing is to seek out the why.
It seems like the more I learn about myself, the more I realize how biased I am
Mm,
and how much of like the concept of just straight up like confirmation bias
right.
I'm just full of. Right. I just have assumptions about why the person I make the assumptions of the whys,
Yeah.
and I just look for like, oh, I knew that. I knew that shit, you
Yeah.
know?
I do.
And if, and again, it seems to keep coming back to just shut up, take a step back, listen,
Hmm.
and you may be very surprised in what you get.
Absolutely. And, you're not alone in that. And I can even tell you in earlier clinical experiences, when I was searching for the why instead of listening for the why,
Mm.
I could be seduced by that same thought trap. And then what happens? I'm actually judging the person, which is completely inappropriate.
They can get that at home.
Huh?
They can get that at home.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for free, right? So, it's one of those things that you learn as a clinical professional over time, but it would be good for you to know it right from the very beginning. If you can't figure out what's going on, your client, your patient, eventually they will tell you. The question is, can you hear it?
Mm.
Can you really hear it? Are you listening for it? Because if you've already made conclusions about what you think their why might be, you're unavailable to hear what's being presented to you. So, how this applies in life is the same way to your point. If you're making attributions or assumptions about what you're certain your wife's or husband's why is, and that's based upon the view of partner that you've acquired because you've gotten hurt or you've been in conflict or whatever, you've already come to a preliminary conclusion that is both negative and false, and you're operating from that as if it's true.
Mhm.
So then your search for the why automatically mounts a defense from partner where they're looking to negate that, and we're stuck.
Is it? It seems like, and tell me if this makes sense at all, where that could even be done as like a defense mechanism. Like, oh, I've been
Absolutely.
down this road before, so you're just kind of looking for it. Like, oh,
Yep.
not doing that.
A thousand
Right.
percent. Yeah. Yep. In
And
other words, I'm smart enough based upon my
yeah,
experiences to already know what your why is.
yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm not okay with that.
And we even call it a boundary
Yeah, we do.
or
We,
something,
we,
right? I'm self-aware and I have proper boundaries, and I'm it's
yeah.
self-protection or something, right?
Yeah. And you know what that is? That's dressing up aggression as mental health.
Hmm.
It's putting a costume on something righteous and weaponizing it and turning it into something harmful.
Hmm.
That's what that is.
Well, okay. I don't do that.
Neither have I ever.
I've never done
No, no.
that.
And now may be a good time to say this. I've said this before. I'll say it again. Please do not think that because I do this professionally or clinically, that I do it well all the time personally, because I do not. What I'm talking about now is not easy to do. It is simple to communicate because I've been thinking through it and working on it for over 3 decades. Okay. So I can deliver, I think, I hope, an elegant and parsimonious system, the framework, right? But when it comes to application and execution, this is hard to do, which is why I've always been befuddled as to why this is referred to, like in business, as the soft skills.
Mm,
I think this should be called the hard skills
mhm,
because this is fucking hard to do. And I fail all the time in applying this. And I have been doing this for 30 plus years. Now, here's where, and I'm not polishing a turd, but here's where this is actually positive and useful. When I make mistakes, which happens with alarming frequency, I can know instantaneously where I went wrong.
mm,
I can self evaluate, I can reconsider these principles, and I know instantaneously the error that I made. So then I can own that. I can think about that. I can make a correction pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, and not accidentally replicate or repeat the same mistake over and over and over and make it worse and worse and worse.
mm,
Right. Now, the analog to that, ironically, when we were talking about my golf game in this golf school that I've been in, it's the same idea, meaning when you play from this position and you stay within the parameters that you're given, you have now been empowered to immediately self diagnose why the shot you just hit was poor. You know, if the if this happens, it's this. If this happens, it's this. So you
mm,
can correct right away. And then when you do the next shot, instead of thinking about how confused you are about why what just happened, you now know it. And you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to do what I've learned. I'm going to stay within that system. I'm just going to do that better. Well, same thing with my system. You know, when you're really well acquainted with these principles, this is high level mastery of the framework. So understand you're going to fuck this up because I do. We all do. We are all human. We are all works in progress. We are dynamic, not static. Okay. Do not ever let perfection get in the way of progress.
mm,
And remember that it's not about making a mistake. It's about paying attention enough and having enough honesty and self esteem and wherewithal to say, I just violated one of my principles. I just made a mistake. Now, in that mistake, if I have that self awareness, if I have this mastery, then I can make a correction right then and there. It reminds me when I was in therapy school, there was this lovely, wonderful professor who said to a very anxious, emerging counselor student who was very frightened of what happens if I make a mistake with a client and then I hurt their feelings or makes things worse. And it's a fair question and certainly a well-intentioned question. It's prohibitive thinking, but it's a fair question. And I love how she answered this question. She said, there are no mistakes as long as you're paying attention. And
mm,
what she means or meant was if you're paying attention, you're going to notice the moment that you do make a mistake. So the truth is, you're gonna make mistakes. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. She didn't say that, but this is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Um, and instead of focusing on, oh my gosh, I just made a mistake and made things worse, focus on, oh, I just made a mistake. I can make a course correction and now make it better and make myself better.
Hmm. You know, the more I learn from you, the more I find my self-talk changing.
Mm.
And most of because I fuck up all the time in so many ways and all the time, especially if you know me. You can concur. But what I find is that it's given me mental language to so when I do see it and call it out, the most empowering thing in that is that what I'm not saying is you fucking idiot.
Right.
What you did, and it's just self-bashing piece
Yes. Yes.
goes away.
Yes. It does.
And it's about refining and fine-tuning my actions and behavior with intention
Right.
rather than just mindlessly bashing my own head.
Right. And that very thing is not only affirming self esteem, but it's evidence of improved self esteem
Mhm,
because you're not shaming yourself
mhm,
and because you're not operating from a place of fear. Because instead of having a relationship with these concepts that's fear based, I'm afraid of making a mistake, you have a different relationship with it, which is I know that when I make a mistake, and it's guaranteed that that's going to happen, when I'm aware of it and paying attention, I can make a course correction right then and there and move forward positively,
mhm,
right? So then internal dialogue does change. So, by the way, if you're that person whose part of your internal dialogue is prohibitive thinking and you don't want to disappoint people and you don't want to hurt people, well, there's that internal dialogue running amok and the shaming running amok, and you're getting further away from, not closer to, being that better partner, that better person that you aspire to be.
mhm,
You can't be successful in trying really hard not to do something. That's the essence and the operational definition of a prohibitive thought. And entertaining that thought means that you have married yourself to the problem and you have literally exited reality because you're literally saying that you think you can observe and measure things that are not observable and unmeasurable, like not becoming something.
mhm,
So, this is about changing your relationship with the idea of mistakes and errors
mhm,
and failure. Failure is progress. And if you have mastery of these principles, which is the essence of the framework, then you're not worried about whether you're going to make a mistake because you know you're going to. The real worry is, am I paying attention enough and am I engaged enough to notice when I make the mistake and then use my mastery of the principles to make a course correction and move forward?
failure is progress.
It is.
I like that.
Yeah,
I think if we can actually really buy that, fucking look out.
that's right. And it's not a hard sell, by the way. One of your really great pieces of advice to business people and entrepreneurs, your advice to me was fail fast. Well, if you think about the meaning assigned to events, which is one of those things, what does that really mean? It means progress quickly.
Mm,
That's what fail fast means.
yeah.
Yeah. So again, this isn't semantics. I'm not polishing turds and squeezing lemonade out of lemons. I'm talking truth and reality and honesty and authenticity. These things are real. They're real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on principle two, all behavior is goal directed?
No, sir.
All righty, sir. So number three, and I will confess, first time I heard this, I said bullshit, but then I realized I had a lot to learn. This one comes directly, excuse me, from my mentor, Uh, Dick Grant, psychiatrist for 50 years. Probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life.
Hmm.
Brilliant, lovely, wonderful. Academic medicine his entire life, dual board certified in psychiatry and internal medicine. The greatest honor of my life, really, one of them, is knowing him and being in relationship with him.
Hmm.
He said, all people are doing the best they can at all times at their current level of understanding. And I'll never forget, we were in a Panera because he and I met every week, once a week, either for dinner or for lunch when we lived in the same place. And then we met every week on Sundays or Saturdays virtually for 12 years.
Hmm.
We had our own kind of like dork book club. You know, we were both academics and a little dorky. And so we liked to read books. But so what we would do is we would talk about politics, culture, sports, what's going on in our lives and with our families. Sometimes we would staff cases. And then we would go to our book and we would talk about our reading. We would read one or two chapters in our book, and that's how we would do it. And so we were sitting in a Panera and we were talking about a case, and he just paused and in his way kind of looked around. He said, this is something my mentor, who was George Saslow, who taught him. All people are doing the best they can at all times at their current level of understanding. So now, imagine how.
It's pretty positive, by the way.
Right. And it sounds suspiciously too positive, doesn't it? Because at least my knee jerk
Mhm.
reaction was to say, no, they're not.
Except for the dicks out there. I mean, there's some just jerks out there.
Right. Right. There are. Like George Costanza, the jerk store called and
Mm.
they're running out of. I never miss an opportunity for a Seinfeld
You're
reference,
good
by
at
the
it.
way. Thank you. Maybe the most essential feature of this principle is the condition at their current level of understanding.
Hmm.
Unless a person is sociopathic, and maybe not all the time, even for the sociopath, everyone truly is doing the best they can at all times at their current level of understanding. Now, that does not mean that people are static and have reached the capacity of what their best is. What it means is that they're dynamic, and in the evolutionary incremental process of change over time, there is maybe reason that they can do better. But at their current level of understanding, people are doing the best they can at all times. So think about how that truism, that principle, facilitates a therapeutic relationship and or a non-therapeutic relationship.
Well, I'm just thinking about that in relationship to partners and kids and friends and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it seems a very loose paraphrase of that seems to almost be give the person the benefit of the doubt,
Sure.
right? Like,
Right.
basically, it put it in layman's terms. They're not trying to be a dick.
Right.
They're doing their best and maybe not, you know, succeeding terribly.
Right.
And but be able to communicate that in the middle of conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who does that? That's why people have to pay you to come sit in a room to get that back,
That's right.
because you don't get that in most relationships.
In fact, you get the opposite in most
Yeah.
relationships, right? So think about, what you just said there. The judgment is you're not doing the best you can and you should do better because you're disappointing me.
Mm.
And that's very authoritarian, very judgmental, assumes that you understand the why, assumes you understand a person's capacity, their circumstances, their situation, and you do not, right? But the reason why that saying is an aspirational sort of ethic, give people the benefit of the doubt, that's a proposition. The why behind that proposition is this principle.
Hmm.
That's why that proposition exists. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It seems like that would be the way to actually love someone through behavior that you may not agree with.
100%. Yeah.
Just holding firm to this person's doing the best they can
Yep.
with what they've got.
Yep.
Maybe they need some space or some grace.
Yep. Or
Not
some
my,
support.
yeah.
Not my judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's not a bridge too far to reflect upon your own experiences and the times in which you made mistakes. And what might you say to a person when you've made a mistake and you're acknowledging it? You say, I really was doing the best I could. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think, hope, believe, hypothesize, aspire that I could do or could have done better. But I was doing the best I could at that time, at that level of understanding.
Well, and this works exceptionally well when the standard is not perfection,
Yes.
right? We're trained from the time we're born, reward the good, punish the bad.
Mhm.
And we have this baffling obsession with perfection
Yes.
in all relationships.
Yes.
And we're disappointed when we don't get it.
Right.
And it's just,
And
it's,
somehow we assume we're in possession of it.
right.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's absurd. It's an actual fallacy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a logical fallacy.
Mm. I'm just sitting here thinking like I'm running through the Rolodex of relationships or of all of this of you take a step back,
Mhm.
shut the hell up.
Yep.
I always come back to the um, impartial
Spectator.
spectator.
Yes.
And, fuck's sake, it reframes the whole thing of perfection's off the table.
Right.
You're doing your very best with what you've got.
Right.
It's not meeting my expectations for whatever the fucking reason.
Right.
Maybe it's my problem.
Right.
Maybe I can, right?
Right.
Um,
Because listen, if you have an implicit or explicit expectation of perfection, then you are the fucking problem.
mhm,
In other words, your thinking is the problem
mhm.
because it presumes that at all times you're in possession of perfection, which then you think enables you to judge the imperfection of others. And that is a fallacy. If we think about the subdiscipline in philosophy of formal logic, and we talk about conditional propositions, if then statements, right?
Mhm.
The if is considered the antecedent of the argument. What follows the word then is considered the consequent of that argument. In formal logic, we can evaluate whether an argument is logical or not based upon what the propositions are and how they function and what kinds they are, right? So let's just use a simple conditional proposition, if this, then this. Where this emerges, sorry for all the nerdy academic philosophy, but that's who I am.
There'll be a chart on the website.
Yeah, and a quiz later. No. Maybe we should put a chart. No, that's a really good idea.
Chart and a dictionary. Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. So think about the conditional propositions that this current subject could go to. If you loved me, you wouldn't do that. If you respected me, then you would change this behavior. Now, the consequent does not follow from that antecedent. And these are all the reasons why.
Hmm.
Because we got to separate person from behavior as well as idea from person. We got to remember that all behavior is goal directed. We got to seek an understanding of that why. And we got to remember that while all this is going on, all people are doing the best they can at all times at their current level of understanding. So, those self righteous conditional propositions that you launch as shitballs at your partner because you're offended, you're upset, your needs aren't being met, whatever, they are distractions, they're logical fallacies. And if you're in possession of them, that's part of the responsibility you have for the very conflict that you're complaining about. Period.
Mic drop.
Boom. So just think about,
Hmm.
every time you've made a mistake, I've made more than I can count, probably today. I know I was doing the best that I could at all times. I really am. And I'm limited. I'm limited by my current level of understanding, which is why last
Hmm.
podcast about know thyself and leading a life of thoughtfulness and introspection is so important to me because I want my current level of understanding to increase over time. So I'm limited by my current level of understanding at all times. The reality of acknowledging that is huge because if I don't, then I think there's no limits to my level of understanding. And therefore, I think I can stand in the position of judgment of all things and people, which is horrendously absurd. And it is a logical fallacy. Okay.
Hmm.
So if that's true of me, as the person who wants to occupy a position of judgment about another person's behavior or their why, then certainly it's true of that person. And the more I seek to shame them and judge them and punish them and put them in their place, the further away I get from relationship, the further away I get from understanding. And none of that is love at all. None of that is love. So if the secondary conditional proposition is, I love you, but dot, 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 well, an extension of the same phenomenon,
Hmm.
right? So that's principle number 3. Go ahead.
I'm just again to, and I know it's already been said, but being in a relationship within an environment where people can be without the judgment, without all this stuff, actually experiencing these principles
Mm,
is so rare.
yes.
They have to pay for it
Yes.
for an hour at a time
Yes.
from a professional.
Yes. Yes.
It's like heartbreaking.
Yes, it is.
And again, to just reiterate, all of these things are vastly attainable
They are.
for all of us to implement in all of our relationships.
Right.
Um, so it's fascinating to me. It's good shit.
It is good shit, and it's a source of empowerment, a source of encouragement. And I say to clients all the time, nobody teaches us this shit growing up. We have to come to therapy to learn it. We have to come to good therapy to learn it. And I might go so far as to say, come to therapy done different.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy done different. Just because we're designed for relationship, and when I use that word designed, I don't want everyone to freak out. It doesn't matter if you believe that that design is divine or if you believe that design is evolutionary or some sort of hybrid between the two. Capital T truth is that human beings are designed for relationship. We're social animals. We've always gathered around the campfire.
Did you know that loneliness is the health the health risks of loneliness is
Mhm.
equivalent to 15 cigarettes a day?
Yeah, people say it's the new smoking, and they're right.
Surgeon General just came out with that.
Yeah, and the Surgeon General is right. And that's why we've been talking, we sort of in this field and then in the media and everything have been talking in particular about the epidemic of male loneliness because of its deleterious effects on organic and psychiatric health.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So if you don't have relationship skills and you're sort of losing in the competitive dating sexual marketplace because you don't have those skills, you don't have that understanding, you're suffering, right? Because we're all designed for relationship. And then, you get the quick and dirty, ultimately misogynistic things coming up, like the pickup artist stuff or and that just tumbles people down, the rabbit hole because that's the veneer of power, control, attractability,
Mhm.
whatever. Okay, let's say you do those things and they actually work and you get the guy, you get the girl. Okay, then what?
Yeah.
You got to have relationship skills to keep them.
Gotta drink a lot.
Yeah, right. 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 So, um, my point is that we have a belief that because we need relationship, because we're designed relationship, then we should be good at it. And all too often, I hear people say things like, well, I know a relationship is right if it doesn't require much work. And if a relationship requires too much work, well, that's a bad relationship for you. And to that, that is a steaming pile of horse shit, right? Every relationship is work. It is real work and it is hard work. It's heavy lifting. It is not for the faint of heart.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's impossible, and that doesn't mean doesn't have extraordinary value, right? So if you want to enjoy all of the benefits that come from a healthy, functional, adaptive, positive, therapeutic relationship, and then from that, as the template, apply what you've learned and use these principles in the framework for your other relationships, you're going to work. Make no mistake about it. And if you have a belief that you shouldn't have to, you don't deserve to be in a relationship anyway. You won't be able to be in one, at least not one that is likely to be sustainable, healthy, functional, adaptive, and gratifying.
Where do you think that comes from? Like that seems like some pretty entitled Karen bullshit.
It is entitlement on both sides of the gender
Do you know
spectrum.
what the root of that thinking is?
I really
Fe-
don't.
Feeling like not having to work for like that. Have they never had a relationship? Are they still wanting something else?
I don't know. It's because it's a great question because it's a departure from everything we understand, let's say, in the United States about the American work ethic.
Mhm.
I mean, a person will say, you shouldn't have to work that hard to be in a relationship, but then they'll turn around and say, you got to work hard in order to be successful in your career or in school
Yeah.
or whatever, right? There's no other place where people say, if it's too much work, don't bother, except relationships. And I have no idea where that comes from. That's an interesting research question. And maybe there's literature on that. I really don't know. But I can certainly speak to the deleterious and absurd effects that adherence to that belief creates.
Could it be ego? Like if you actually understood me, you wouldn't have to work at it.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And
I don't
ego,
know.
if you actually understood these things, you'd be a better partner for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I got to say, I think I have capacity, potential, and there's evidence to suggest I'm a pretty decent relational partner. And I make mistakes all the time, all the time. I have to work, labor to be the best relational partner I can be, and I fall short of that frequently, but I also don't let perfection get in the way of progress. And I always say, like any other endeavor, if you think that you know everything that you need to know and there's nothing more to be learned, then that's the moment you better stop doing what the hell you're doing.
Mhm.
That's just as true in relationships as it is in your profession.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people who are in professions and they think they can't learn anything more. They consider themselves experts, and they do have expertise, to be sure. But if you think that that expertise is finite, you're fucked, because you're deceiving yourself, if not delusional, thinking that you can't learn more, you can't get better, that your current level of understanding can't improve. And in fact, I submit that the most successful people in any endeavor are the ones that realize they can always get better.
Mhm.
And that truth, that reality is not a source of shame. It's not self deprecation. It's honesty.
Yeah.
And when you own that, you're not letting your ego get in the way, right?
Yeah.
And paradoxically, maybe, or ironically, maybe, that's making you an even better leader, because now the troops see that you're real, that you're authentic, and they're going to rally behind that shit because it's rare.
Mm.
It's very rare.
Well, it's at least has the opportunity to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
moment you think you are the top,
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible to be authentically real because you're clearly bullshit.
Yes.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Well said. Okay. Number 4. I always say number or principle. Where you are is not who you are.
Mm.
Last podcast, we were in the middle of a discussion about what happens when a person feels stuck. And that led to one example where I was talking about how I see that phenomenon of stuckness very often occurring in divorced males. And then there were a couple of people who shit themselves saying that this is horribly one sided. Well, it's not horribly one sided. It's just one side of a multifaceted thing that happened in a 20-second clip over a 3-hour podcast. But I
Mhm.
digress. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, where you are is not who you are. So our circumstances can make us think or feel that those circumstances are representative of our identity, who we are. So, for example, if you're going through a divorce, you may say, I feel like a loser. Or if you're delayed in your academic progression in college and you didn't fit that 4-year model and you're on year 5.5 and you think you're a big loser because it's taking you longer than your peers and everybody else is getting jobs and starting careers or maybe starting families and you feel behind. Where you are is not who you are. You can't allow your current circumstances to lead you to believe that that's representative of your total identity. So when a person
Mhm.
comes in and says, I feel broken, I say, okay, it's okay to feel that way, right? Let's talk about what's broken and why you're feeling broken. Maybe the marriage is feeling broken. Maybe the family system is fractured and broken. Maybe you've been estranged or alienated from your children or from your family members or whatever it is, right? Um, because you're in those circumstances, that is not a representation of who you are. Where you are is not who you are.
Well, again, how powerful would it be to hear those words outside of the therapy room?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I keep trying to take the opportunity where every one of us has the opportunity to be this person to ourselves and to someone else.
Yes,
You know,
I do. Yes,
fuck's sake, like that's great.
it is. That's why I loved this idea of yours for this podcast, because it's benevolently brilliant. Because the idea is, imagine what it would be like to experience this in therapy, first of all, but then to be able to take that experience and give that to someone you care about, to receive that from someone you care about. And that is not pie in the sky wishful thinking.
Mm.
And I think this is why we're both so committed to this framework podcast, because this is doable, folks. This isn't some grand aspirational, you know, cotton candy ride unicorns kind of fantasy situation. No, this is really reality. And if you adhere to these principles and you play within the parameters we're setting for you and plug your own values in, because that's what the framework does. It's value free, doesn't contain our values. It is a structure and a system for you to put your own values into. If you apply this, then the stuff that we're talking about, which seems grandiose and almost, otherworldly, can be very real.
It can seem grandiose and otherworldly until you start to do it and realize it's actually can be quite simple. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not second nature.
Nice. Nice.
And
I like that.
it takes some repetition to get it happening.
It does.
It's not overly complicated
No.
once you start to understand the principles.
No. Yeah. In fact, we interfere with it and complicate it all the time. That's what makes it complicated, is when we interfere.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also the limits of our understanding. So since nobody teaches us stuff growing up,
Mm-hmm.
all the stuff we have acquired about what we think we're supposed to do or how it's supposed to work very often gets in the way of and interferes with this. So once you learn this, you kind of don't have any excuses anymore. It's now about being disciplined. It's now about being focused and committed to adherence to that system. You got to trust it. But if your trust starts to waver, or you start to tinker with it, or you think maybe you know better than this, then you're interfering with it and it's likely to get messed up. So don't interfere. Trust it.
Trust it.
Trust it. Okay. Number 5. Feelings are not facts. Feelings are actually a result of thinking. Now, you might think that this one could interfere with the therapeutic relationship, because it seems almost like there's this idea or threat that feelings are being discounted or minimized or negated, right? So there might be concern that this could threaten a therapeutic relationship, or it could threaten another relationship if stated explicitly in that way. Particularly if you're interacting with a person who self-describes or self-identifies as very much a feelings-oriented creature. So there might be some confusion out there about why this is one of the principles, and how is it that acknowledgement of this principle enhances and contributes to an environment of a good relationship rather than detracts.
Tell me if I'm wrong in this line of thinking with what you're saying. Do you find it somewhat common in sessions that um, people think their own feelings are facts, but the other person's are bullshit?
Yes. And to add to it, because they conclude their feelings are facts, no other facts are permissible. We must honor my feelings as truth. And if you don't, then you don't respect me. You don't understand me.
Mm.
You're not listening to me. Da, 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 da,
If
da.
you loved me, you'd think differently.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yep. Yes.
That's interesting.
hmm Yeah. So it is imperative to learn that feelings are real, feelings matter, feelings are not facts.
You know that it's not a meme, but it's like a just the idea of like, that you're sitting in church or something and the preacher's saying something, you're elbowing the person next to you, like you better listen to this or whatever that the dynamic is,
Yeah.
it seems like when we find ourselves in that scenario, we've got to look inside first. And that's the last place you want to because you think you're fucking right.
Right. Right. Because you feel that way.
But the more I'm starting to learn and understand it, it seems like if you have to start in yourself
Yes.
and to be shocked in the shit you find. And likely how it's probably not as much of the other people as you think. And that can be a hard pill to swallow,
hmm
but it's actually quite liberating
Yes.
because you can actually do something about yourself.
That's the
You can't
point.
do a fucking thing about somebody else.
Thank you.
All right. You're
That
welcome.
that is absolutely the point. It's
Yeah.
why I say self-awareness is crucial to relationship awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be relationally aware without really good self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which was the subject of the last podcast, right? Um yeah.
Seems like every time we talk, I just make a list of apologize to this person, apologize to this person. Uh, every time. It's good stuff.
Well, thank you. And I go through something similar, but I want to emphasize the point that you just made that to do this is liberating and
Mm-hmm.
empowering because that is true. It really is true.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a person who's insisting that your feelings are considered facts, you're holding the other person and the situation hostage. And you're actually using a manipulation and a guilt strategy or technique in order to win or to prevail in a competitive kind of context. Now, here's an example. And again, going from the golf thing, if you're chasing a feeling, you're never going to find it again, right? The feeling that you had in the good golf shot is a product, a consequence
Mm-hmm.
of what you did in your setup position, what you did in your technique. So don't focus on the feeling and chase the feeling. Instead, focus on the source of that feeling, which was the proper execution of your technique and fundamentals. And the same thing is true in relationships. All right. We're chasing these feelings, or we're talking about feelings as if they're facts, but we're departing from the actual source of that. And the source of that is how you think and what you believe, because how you think and what you believe is what prompts the behavior, the communication, all that, which in turn then affects how we feel. Which is why I say our feelings are real, our feelings are matter, but the reason why they're not facts is because they're consequences of what we think. And what we know about thinking is that our thinking gets fucked up all the time. It gets seduced and distracted by mythology, by stereotype, all of those types of things, meaning we assign to events, whatever. So if we're unwilling well, I shouldn't say unable because every person has a capacity to do it. If we're unwilling to examine our thinking, if we're unwilling to examine our beliefs, we're not in a position to do anything about how we feel. So if you feel depressed and you feel sad, okay, my goodness, that's real. my goodness, that matters. Okay. But how you feel about yourself probably is not a fact. That is a consequence of your thinking and your beliefs. So we need to examine the thinking and the beliefs to empower you, to liberate you from bad thinking or faulty beliefs so that we can get to the behavioral change that we're needing, the environmental change that we're needing, so that we can get to affecting the affective side, the feeling side. That's how you treat, let's say, depression.
Mm. I thought you just told him to calm down, chill out, get over it.
Get over it. Yeah. What's the big deal? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right. Uh, Number 6 is just the principle of prohibitive and affirmative thinking. And we've talked about that on many podcasts. We won't belabor the point, but the reason why it's here is because it's something that I'm doing and aware of all the time. I'm listening for prohibitive thinking and I'm wanting to catch it as frequently as I can find it. Not because I'm looking to shame anyone, not because I'm looking to judge anyone, not because of any of that. It's because I know that where prohibitive thinking is taking place, bad rules follow. So I teach that we celebrate every time we find a prohibitive thought because it then contains the opportunity to get reps at and to practice acknowledging why that prohibitive thought is there and then being intentional about moving it to the affirmative side. And there's plenty of podcasts on that and articles on that from on my website.
Absolutely. And I think as we continue to talk about moving these concepts from the therapy room into the other environments,
Yeah,
one of the things I've really found, and again, I've mentioned this before, of just having the language of a lot of the concepts that we're talking about, as
yeah,
makes it very easy to communicate.
yeah,
And when you start to recognize prohibitive thinking, either in yourself or someone else, and you have a conversation using that term,
yes,
it's a really good tool to explore and try to get to the why
yes,
in a non-confrontational way.
right,
Um, because now we're talking about concepts and theories and things that has nothing to do with the person. And it's
exactly.
very, very I have found that very, very empowering
Yeah,
and a good tool.
yeah, that is really, really well said. Um, and notice now, this is the interactive nature of all the principles because, to your point, gets to the why, which is that behavior is goal directed. That comes from separating person from behavior, all the things, right? And language. I want to emphasize that too. I talk all the time with my clients that if you're going to be guilty of anything, be guilty of annoying the shit out of your partner by using so much therapeutic language.
Mhm.
Because when that language is shared in common and people understand the terminology, the threat is taken away. We're not in a risky situation where now we need to mount a defense or anything like that. Our brains, quite literally, the prefrontal cortex, can redirect from the conflict pattern that we may be in, shift focus, and then start thinking
Mhm.
and start examining. And yes, now we can talk about these things, and that illuminates the path to the why.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I was just thinking, sort of times that I've actually done that probably too much,
Mm.
and have been met with not too much, but often. And it's like, okay, Mister Therapist, all right, Mister There Philosopher, it's good, you and your therapy shit or whatever, which is good, because it takes accusations um, it takes so much of the possible negativity out of it, because now we're just, again, we're negotiating concepts.
Mhm.
And it's this other thing.
Yep.
It's not two people.
Right.
And anyway, so I've already said it. It's I'm just saying it's good shit.
Yeah, it is. We're not talking about the people, we're talking about the idea, and honestly, it's a place for humor because it's like,
Mhm.
it happens a lot of times, I'll be listening to a client, and then they'll say one, and then they catch it right away, and they say, I know, prohibitive thinking."
Mhm.
Ah, right? And then we have a good laugh about it,
Yeah.
and then we say, "All right, yeah, yeah, good job. You caught it." And that's what I was talking about earlier
Yeah.
with regard to mistakes. Your mastery of the framework, I mean, instantaneously, the moment they hear themselves talking out loud, they're like, "Oh, okay, yep, prohibitive thinking. Okay, now I can correct."
Mhm.
Right. And yes, far less threatening because we're talking about an idea, not a person, which is where we started. Separate person from behavior, separate idea from person. Bingo.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Number 7. We did a full podcast on this, but it's one of the principles that is present that creates the kind of environmental conditions for relationship that we're discussing. And that is, I choose to function as the impartial spectator. And I think that everything that we've said up to this point just illuminates further that concept of impartial spectator that we've already discussed, right? Because if we're focusing on ideas, not the person, if we're focusing on behavior, not person, if we're focusing on understanding the why, we're looking for prohibitive thinking, all that,
Mhm.
that stuff is made possible, is operational because you're occupying a position, you're playing from a position. If I'm impartial, I'm not judging, I'm not coming to preliminary conclusions, I'm not doing any of it. And if I'm a spectator, I'm taking my time.
Mhm.
We as human beings, given our brains, our use of schema and all of that, we come to quick and dirty conclusions. And then often, if there is logic or where there is logic, it's done because we then try to assemble a rationale to justify that quick and dirty conclusion we came to. There's a couple of wonderful authors, Mercier and Sperber, who wrote a book called The Enigma of Reason, and that's where
Mhm.
this is coming from, that it is appropriate to think of ourselves as human beings as rational creatures. But it's a deception to think that that rationality has linearity to it that then produces a conclusion. What Mercier and Sperber argue in part in that wonderful book, Enigma of Reason, is that we actually come to quick and dirty conclusions, really fast conclusions. And then we kind of reverse engineer, we work backwards to try and assemble a logic to then rationally explain or defend that position. If you're the impartial spectator, you're not doing the quick and dirty conclusions, because to be a spectator is to take your time and to observe the behavior and then take your time to inquire about the why and all the other things that we've been talking
Mhm.
about. One of the things that you can learn from a therapist, or if you're becoming one or you are one, is how valuable the concept of wait time is. WAIT time. Wait time. Here's an example. Let's say that you're working with someone therapeutically or consultatively, and they're having an emotionally intense moment, a period of great distress. Letting them sit in that quietly and not interfering by handing a tissue or filling the void with some sort of space, and just being silent and quiet and letting that happen for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 120 seconds. Folks, that's not easy, but oh my, is it powerful. Because if you wait and you give essentially permission for that suffering person to take the time to be in that situation that they're in, and you don't interfere with a bunch of what you think is going to be helpful horseshit, more usually tumbles out. But if you intervene, if you intercede, because somehow you're uncomfortable with a tearful or emotionally expressive person or client, you may interfere and prevent the rest of that stuff from tumbling out. So the impartial spectator allows you to play from a position where you're not anxious to fill the void of silence. And you're actually giving a soft place to land for that person, because what do you want or need from them most anyway? Them to be expressive of the full story, so why cut it off? There's great power in waiting. Don't rush it. Don't impose anything upon it or interfere. As the impartial spectator, you can be slightly detached, but detached doesn't mean disengaged.
Mm.
You're just not letting your own anxiety about someone else's plight affect that situation. You're giving them permission to be where they are. So wait time is extraordinarily powerful. And that's a principle that you can apply at home today. Because men, for example, are famous for wanting to come up with solutions and fixes to any time their spouse talks about how they're feeling or a problem or an emotion, right? And what's that classic dilemma? It's not about the nail. If you haven't seen that YouTube video, oh my gosh, take a look at it, because it just never is not funny, right?
Mhm.
But it's a wonderful example of the phenomenon that we're talking about. Even if you do want to provide a solution, or you simply want to be a listening person, right? Wait, take time, because more is likely to tumble out after a period of silence.
Every time I think about the impartial spectator, I think of prioritizing understanding over everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about like an environment, for sure, judgment free,
Mm-hmm.
just open, quiet,
Mm-hmm.
help me understand, period. I'm not going to fucking fix it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to correct you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to do anything other than understand where you're at this very moment.
Right. Right.
Good Lord, that feels really good when you can be in a room and actually feel that coming. Like when someone offers you that opportunity,
Yeah.
and that's probably a really good way to say it, is you're being offered the opportunity
Yeah.
to be understood without judgment.
Oh,
Again, I've paid for it
right.
because I can't find it anywhere else
Right.
yet. And again, to reiterate this, we all have the opportunity to do that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very high likelihood we'll get it back
Mm-hmm.
once that environment's created,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely.
And what's more important than understanding another human being?
Mm.
Nothing, not a
Nothing.
damn thing.
Absolutely.
Kids, spouse, friends, no one.
Right. Right. Talk about a source of empowerment.
Yeah.
An example of love is
Yeah.
seeking that understanding, acquiring that understanding, being understood. What a beautiful moment of
Mhm.
pure bliss, safety, comfort,
Mhm.
right? And every one of you has the capacity to do this right now. What we're providing is the tools to operationalize that capacity, to create through labor and through
Mhm.
principle an environment conducive to these kinds of outcomes. Because that's the environment you work and labor to produce and create in therapy. And you can do it at home, and you can do it for yourself. Yeah.
You'd likely give a woman an orgasm if you just said, honey, I just want to understand. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to say anything else. I just want to understand you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then if you want multiples, offer to do the dishes. You know,
Yeah.
quite literally in those
Yeah.
stereotypical but
Yeah.
yes, yes, and yes. And I would, to use one of your favorite phrases that I love so much and cracks me up every time you say it, let's flip it on its ass. Men would love to be understood too. M-
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, very often men are misunderstood. And because men lack relational or communication skills, generally speaking, compared to female partners or female, because they're just not as sociable and relationally oriented. They're more task oriented, and they've been trained and socialized that they need to have a plan, that they need to have solutions, that they need to have answers. It's okay for them to have problems. Men need to be understood too. And if their effort to be understood is then punished as, well, that's toxic masculinity, or that's misogyny, or that's
Mhm.
wrong, or whatever the critique is, then not only do they not feel understood, but they're in an environment where it's not safe to even try.
Mhm.
So it works for both.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, but to your point, yes, that is an efficient route to orgasm and satisfaction for sure.
I think there's probably a deeper need for men for understanding than unless you're actually really going down a self-actualizing route.
Mm, hmm.
Um, I know I don't. Again, if I'm just thinking back over the years, probably being terribly misunderstood
Hmm.
so many different times and
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
God, it's such an easy opportunity to give someone else.
It is. And, lest we be remiss, let us not just think about this in a heterosexual context. Let's
Okay.
talk about the gay male community for a moment. One of the places where a gay male can be so radically misunderstood is when they want to have a monogamous and sustainable relationship, and they feel like the gay community and the rules of the gay community really eschew that very often, or the idea that you have to be really fit and you have to be, all those types of things. I mean, gay men really, really struggle, especially when they're new to that community. Maybe it took them a long time to come out. Maybe they're so unfamiliar with sort of the rules that they're now learning and exposed to about being in that community. And vice versa can be totally misunderstood if what they want is to be able to date and to play with others and to have sexual relationships without the necessity of some kind of committed or monogamous relationship. So the point is, this is a human thing, and it's not
Mhm.
just something that happens between males and
Mhm.
females. It happens in any relational configuration, and the pain of being misunderstood is soul crushing. Another example where you see this all the time, speaking of pain, is pain patients. They feel very often misunderstood. They're accused of being med seekers. They're accused of, inflating their condition. And oftentimes they acquire a belief, you can't understand me unless you've experienced this exact pain that I'm going through, which is a cognitive distortion, but we could see why they would feel that way. And what are they really talking about? What they're really talking about oftentimes is, I feel misunderstood. I feel judged. I feel scared. I feel vulnerable. I don't feel safe. I'm in a grief and loss process because I don't possess the abilities or the strength or the tolerance to do things I used to be able to do. And now I feel weak, and now I feel like I'm failing, and all that stuff. So those statements, if you don't ask about the why, if you don't seek an understanding, they feel chronically misunderstood, and that is a great place of suffering. And they're already suffering from the deleterious effects of chronic pain anyway. So now you've got stress, anxiety, and depression from not being understood, adding to that, which only increases cortisol, which increases inflammation, which increases pain. So, my point, our point, one of the greatest gifts that you could possibly ever give to any person is for them to be understood without the overlay of judgment or the expectation of perfection. Yeah.
Mm. And I think that really applies to parenting without a whole bunch.
Mm,
And I think sometimes, can I say woke bullshit on here without being pissing people off?
mm, mm,
We'll find out. I think it gets taken to an extreme.
mm,
A lot of um, stuff, parenting techniques and things where it's so, just, you gotta, you know what I'm talking about. This does the thing. Does
mm,
this make you understand what I'm talking
mm, mm. I think so.
about?
Like no standards, consequence-free environment,
Thank you.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just let them do whatever, and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, because again, I actually think that the entire purpose of parenting is to help a child learn how to think.
Yes.
And what an amazing way to support that would be by asking them, help me understand why you did that.
Yep.
Help me understand your thinking
Yep.
through this
Yep.
before we get into rewarding the good, punishing the bad, and going down all kinds of things.
Agreed.
You know,
Yes, I do.
fuck's sake.
Yeah.
I
And
wish I'd have known that 20 years ago. Sorry, kids.
me too. Me too. And maybe more to the point, I wish I would have practiced that more consistently than
Mm,
I did.
yeah.
One of my biggest errors, right? Frequently. But yes, the point is teaching kids how to think rather than what to think
Mhm,
is what we're talking about. And that's the be understood and seeking an understanding part.
mhm,
Perhaps the most loving act that one human can um, convey or provide to another. Rage can often come from the intensity of how it feels to be in a protracted place of being chronically misunderstood. When you think about the South Central riots in the wake of the Rodney King verdict and the Simi Valley trial when the 4 LAPD officers were acquitted, 1992, I believe. Um, Pure rage that sparks at the intersection of Florence and Normandy. And what was the powder cake for that rage? Well, a lot of things, right? But one of them was an LAPD officer not understanding what an African American young male was doing just outside of a liquor store at that intersection. And people observing the way that that person was being mistreated and a complete lack of understanding. And the place was primed for an explosion. And so then much of white America outside of that area looks upon the LA riots and says, I don't understand this at all. Folks are tearing up their own communities. How could this be? Right. And it's unadulterated rage by being disempowered and misunderstood. And in part, that misunderstood and that disempowered is we in this community have been telling the world for 70 years or more that LAPD has been treating us terribly and no one will fucking listen. And this time we even had it on video. We had undeniable data that what we've been saying is actually true.
Mhm.
And this is after, Christopher Commission. I can't remember if this was before or after Rampart Division, but my point is being chronically misunderstood can lead even to the kind of rage that we saw in those riots,
Hmm.
right? And imagine what would have happened or could have happened differently either before, during, or after if people really endeavored to understand and said, help me
Yeah.
understand, right? So is that an extreme example? Sure, but it's a real one. It's a very real one.
Was it Martin Luther King that said, anger is the language of the unheard or voice of the unheard or something like that?
Oh, I don't know,
It's a
but
slight misquote, but that's the right message, and it's
mm,
great.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um understanding um probably one of the greatest gifts.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on
Nope.
that one? All right. Principle 8, remember that we assign meaning to events. And so when I'm working with a person and we're creating that therapeutic environment that we're talking about, when you're listening to your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your kids, your boss, whatever, it's not the event that causes the disturbance. It's the meaning we assign to the event that causes the disturbance. And so to seek an understanding of a person's thinking or the conclusions that they come to, in part, is by asking questions, not necessarily about the event, whatever the event is, but the meaning that that person has assigned to that event. Because sometimes the meaning we assign to events is inaccurate. It's not supported by reality or evidence, but we nonetheless, maybe because we feel it, deem it to be true. And when that happens, a negative false conclusion takes root, and then we operate from that as if it were true. So if we're seeking an understanding of another person or of their thinking, it's useful to examine the meaning they assign to events. And this could be something seemingly trivial or something huge. And so, you know, if there's an event like my spouse came home 4 hours later than they normally do, okay, that's an event. There is all kinds of meaning that we can assign to that event, even if the explanation for that is different from the meaning we assign. So that's maybe a silly, trivial example, but
Mhm.
we were just talking about the LA riots. There was a lot of meaning assigned to the event of the acquittal of the officers in Simi Valley. There was a lot of meaning assigned to what we watched when Rodney King was being beaten. We have to understand the meaning people assign to events. And when we do, we understand the thinking, the beliefs, and we can connect better and facilitate the kind of relational environment that is conducive to growth and safety and acceptance and all the things we're talking about.
Mhm. Think about something as, you know, even initiating or not initiating sex.
Yeah. Yep. Good one.
It's easy to assign
Hmm.
meaning that may or may not be, or it may not be there.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, this is an easy one to screw up.
Oh.
On the assigning of meaning to all kinds of things. I mean,
Hmm.
fuck's sake.
Yep.
And again, coming back to shut up, take a step back,
Yep.
try to understand before you
Yep.
project some bullshit,
Yep. Yep.
and get pissed off, go down the rabbit hole and all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sitting in my cubicle. My boss came by and didn't say hi to me. That must mean I'm getting fired, or that must mean that my
Hmm.
boss doesn't like me, or right?
Hmm.
Meaning assigned to an event rather than the event itself. And there's this whole series of emotional distress we go through that may be utterly unnecessary, because maybe what happened is that boss was doing everything they could to get to the can because they were going to shit themselves and they didn't have time for pleasantries,
Mhm.
right? Be mindful of the meaning that you assign to events, and be mindful that others assign meaning to events too. It's how human beings make sense of the world. There is some sort of event or stimuli in the environment. We then, as human beings, different from all other mammals, have the ability to try and put that into context to make sense of the world. But it's right then and there when we put things in that context that we can make thinking errors. It wasn't that long ago when people thought that the occurrence of lightning was because Zeus was pissed, right? That was meaning assigned to the event. We now know lightning occurs for different
When he
reasons.
sneezes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm trying to, again, I keep thinking about this and bringing it back to, as a therapist or as a consultant, sitting in a room with another human being and they're telling you about their stuff.
Yeah.
You are sitting there listening, trying to understand, no skin in the game,
Right.
nothing, taking nothing personal.
Right.
You're being and the only way you're doing that is you're always the impartial spectator.
Right.
So I'm trying to bring that back to a practical application within outside relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it seems like to me that when we find ourselves upset, triggered,
Mm-hmm.
pissed off, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably a good time for a question
Yes.
rather than an accusation.
Yes.
Almost
Absolutely.
always.
Kind of always.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, a person may be thinking, well, yeah, sure, you can do this because you're a therapist and
Mhm.
you don't have any stake in the game. But I'll tell you, don't forget that every person that sits in front of me is a person I care for. Truly. Right. So I'm not some sort of unemotional automaton. And I'm not a blank slate either. I'm a person. People forget that therapists are people too. Therapists sometimes forget that they're people too. But the truth is, I care for
Mm.
people. That's why I do this. And so I'm not 100% detached. I'm in a relationship and I care for the person I'm in relationship with. They are under or in my care.
Mm.
So it's not a bridge too far because,
Mm.
you care about your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband, your what, right? So it's not a bridge too far.
Mhm.
It's not that you have to disconnect from your emotional life to do this. Far from it.
Mhm.
I am a person. I'm loaded with emotions. When I hear something, anything, but especially things that are tragic or unbelievable, I feel, you know. But my job separating, that is to start thinking about the puzzle and the framework and assembling a strategy to assist the suffering of this other person and to contribute to solving problems having identified them. There's times when I have cried with clients, and I'm not ashamed to say that because I'm allowed to be human. Well, there's some therapists who may say, oh gosh, well, that's transference or countertransference. And to that, I say, fuck you, because it's real.
Yeah.
and I'm real.
It's relationship.
It is. And so when I have a client, you know, who tells me that their 14-year-old son was raped in a school by another male perpetrator, and it was caught on security camera, and that child is devastated, and the client is devastated. Do not think for 1 second that I am not crying on the inside, that I don't feel, that I'm not angry, that I'm not, because I'm all those things. I'm all those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not led by all those things because I have to be in a position where this governs this, but this informs this,
Mm.
right? They're interconnected. But this cannot be the driving force because this is not fact. And this can't be the only thing that's happening because I'm not Spock and we don't live in some imaginary world where there's no emotion,
Mm.
right? So please do not think or be deceived that simply because I do this professionally, that it's not something you can do similarly.
Mm.
Because remember, and we teach this in psychotherapy, that psychotherapy, and very often it's a person's first exposure to this, but psychotherapy, one of its many benefits, if there is a relationship there, is that it's supposed to be a model for healthy relationship
Mm.
and contain all the things that a healthy relationship contains. So sure, yes, there's boundaries and there's rules, but there's also empathy. There's also, all the real of being human.
Mm.
And it hurts my heart to see other humans suffer, you know? But I got to use my brain to assist with that. And the same thing is true of you out there in the wild and in your own relationships, and that's why we're giving these principles, because no, we're not asking you to become therapists to do this. We're not even thinking that you can or should or that that would be a good idea. Not at all. The difference between a therapeutic relationship and a friendship or a romantic relationship is very significant, right?
Mm-hmm.
The techniques that are used, the boundaries that are there, all those things, very, very different. So don't confuse the issue. But the principles that
Yeah.
drive it, those are the things that are transferable, just like the framework is. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think it's certainly not the relationship, but I think there are, like you said, principles of the environment.
Yeah.
Um, and it's unfortunately so rare,
Hmm.
and it just doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, and that's our point.
Yep.
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 Yep. Okay. Number 9, to know a person is to know their rules.
Mm.
When I'm listening to a client in therapy or consulting, and I'm listening to them describe their feelings, describe their experiences, describe their thinking, their problems, right? Uh, what I'm hearing, if I'm listening and paying attention, is their rules. And I'm hearing where rules are being broken or violated, and they may not even know that they have those rules, but I know that they do because I know that rules exist. Because relationship is all about the rules, and because conflict in relationship is all disputes about those rules. So when I listen, I'm listening for rules. And this is something that's really powerful for you guys out there and gal. When you hear a person say something, particularly something definitive or declarative, it is okay to ask, is that a rule? Because it likely is. And remember the operational definition of rules. Our rules are our values, needs, wants, desires, fantasies, preferences. Okay, those are the
Mm-hmm.
rules. So let's say that your spouse comes home from a crappy day at work and they need to vent and they're upset, and you're listening to the description of what happened. Okay. Rather than jumping into offering a fix or a solution, listen for what rules got broken or got violated, because then when you use that language, they feel what? Heard and understood. So then they can say, yes, that's why I'm so upset. And they can feel validated. And notice, we're not validating poor thinking or wonky beliefs. We're
Mhm.
validating that this experience makes sense in light of the rules that you have and how they were broken. And there is acceptance and there's understanding. And it's a superpower. It really is.
Mhm.
When you listen actively to another person, you're trying to hear what their rules are. And then you simply ask questions. Is that a rule? Sounds like you have a rule that is XYZ. Now, that other person that you're speaking with may not even realize that that is a rule that they have or play by. It may be that that's in the blind arena for them. And notice when you identified it, you're not judging it, you're demonstrating that you were listening
Mhm.
and you're asking questions and you're helping facilitate self awareness for that person.
Mhm.
And now that's much more help than saying, I think you ought to just do this, right? Infinitely more helpful to help someone find rules that they didn't know were there than to tell them what to do because you think it would be a good solution that helps them.
I mean, how much better is it to in the understanding process, or not better, but how wonderful is it while we seek to understand somebody else to help them understand themselves,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of
That's
the
good partnership right
it's
there.
great partnership, and it's one of the gifts of a beautiful relationship is when you're with somebody who helps you understand yourself, because that's how we grow. That's how we evolve. That's how we get better. It's how we find internal peace,
Mhm.
right? Is through that.
Mhm.
And oftentimes when you're with the right person, that's what they're helping you do. Yeah. All right. 10. Conflict is no more and no less than a rule dispute. That's another principle. So if you're in conflict, if your friend or partner's in conflict, just remember it's not about the person, it's actually about the rule dispute. And that is one of the biggest empowering things for managing, preventing, resolving conflict. Knowing without exception, it's no more and no less than a rule dispute, period. Don't interfere and make it more than that, because it
Mhm.
isn't.
Mhm.
Now, that's not to minimize it by saying it's simply a rule dispute, but it's to acknowledge the simple truth. It is a rule dispute. So figure out what the fucking rule is, figure out what the form of the dispute is, and now you have everything that you need in order to understand, to support, to assist, to help, to resolve. And like I always say, if you want to change your partner, good luck.
Mhm.
Ain't gonna happen. But you can change the rules. So if it's the case, and it is, that conflict is a rule dispute, well, you can change that by changing the rules, not by attempting to change another person.
Repeat the quote, that your mentor told you about people being doing the rest
All people are doing the best they can at all times at their current level of understanding.
at their current level of understanding.
Mhm.
It's really not all of that. It doesn't take that much energy to increase your understanding.
Right.
Um, I can't even I feel like I'm a different person knowing a lot of this, and I'm just starting, but I feel like I'm in a different place completely
Mm,
knowing that,
mm,
knowing a lot of these principles,
mm,
starting to apply a lot of these principles.
mm,
Um, so it seems to be incredibly encouraging
mm,
that with some simple understanding, some simple access to some of these truths, everything can change.
Yes.
Our entire place can change.
Mm-hmm. And the experience of being us can change.
Yeah.
And that's why we're doing this. I love that you use the word access. So if you can't afford therapy, or if you don't live in Arizona and you can't do therapy, or you can't afford consulting, you live outside Arizona, you can't work with me, whatever. You got this. You got this, and you can do something with this to change your life and improve your life. And if you are working with me and you can afford to work with me, these are supplements to everything we're doing in therapy. They're additional resources, additional support. That's why we are doing this, to help people. It's not just because we believe in it and think that people should think like us. It's because we know it fucking works.
Yeah.
It just works.
It does.
Okay. 2 bonus ones real quickly.
Oh, shit.
I know we did a top 10, but I just want to throw out a couple bonus ones. Number 1, when you stop focusing on outcome and you start focusing on process, things get better. Anxiety often comes from your adherence to needing to forge to a certain outcome. Don't do that. Once you decide the goal, stop focusing on it and start focusing on process. Because if you execute the process well, the goal will take care of itself. And we've given you 10 principles to focus on and execute. So you want to have a better relationship, you want to reconcile, you want to prevent a divorce, you want to get a divorce, whatever. The moment you establish the goal is the moment you have to stop thinking about it. Because anything that you think is antithetical to that is you interfering with the process. And in order to get to that outcome, you have to focus on and execute the process. You have to be present, you have to be engaged, you have to be available. So focus on process, not outcome. And finally, remember, behavior is everything. If you're in a situation where there's a discrepancy between what someone says and what they do, one of the biggest relational red flags there is, okay? Words matter, yes, but if there's a discrepancy between the words and the behavior, focus on the behavior, because behavior is everything. Everything. Doesn't matter what a person says that they're intending to do, what they were, what do they do? And then boom, you're right into step number 1. Separate person from behavior. Remember that behavior is goal directed, that there's a why behind that they're doing the best they can. It'll tell you, right? Don't be deceived by words. If there's a discrepancy, focus on the behavior. So there it is. That's how you take what can occur in a relational environment therapeutically and apply it to your life. You can cultivate this and insist upon this in your work with your therapist and in your work, in your relationships with all the other important people in your life.
Yeah, I love it. It's not all about just getting and fixing yourself. It's about learning tools to actually love and support and serve other people.
Oh, I love that. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
All right.
Really great discussion.
Absolutely. Beer 30?
Beer 30.
Okay.
Indeed.
All right.
Everybody have a wonderful day, night, whatever. And check us out on YouTube for the full podcast. Check us out on TikTok for shorts. Check us out on the website, www.davidwaselkow.com. And let us know if you have comments, if you have questions. We're happy to respond and kind of eager to do so. So until next time,
Absolutely.
be well.
Good night.